It was just after 7 p.m. in a Memphis grocery store. Elvis, ball cap low, pushed a cart down aisle 4. Then he froze. At the register, a young mother counted coins and came up short. Before we get to what happened next, and why the cashier's words would stop the king of rock and roll in his tracks, make sure you're here for the stories that prove kindness still wins. The glass doors slid open with a hiss, letting in the faint scent of rain from the parking lot, and in walked Elvis Presley, alone. It was early summer, 1975. The air inside the small Memphis grocery store buzzed under fluorescent lights. Rows of metal shelves gleamed faintly. Somewhere near the bakery, the smell of fresh bread lingered, mixing with the faint sweetness of ripe bananas. Witnesses later recalled that Elvis wore a navy ball cap pulled low, a loose jacket over a simple shirt, no rhinestones, no spotlight. He moved with the quiet ease of a man who wanted no attention, just milk, bread, maybe some peace. He guided his cart toward the dairy section, the wheels squeaking faintly on the waxed floor. A carton of milk, a bunch of bananas, and a jar of peanut butter landed in the basket. Ordinary items, ordinary trip, but across the store, something shifted. Near the front, at register 3, a young mother in a faded denim jacket was unloading groceries onto the belt. Her son, no more than 7, clutched a cereal box to his chest like it was treasure. The cashier, an older woman with kind eyes, read off the total. The mother bit her lip. Then, in a motion that felt far too practiced, she began sliding items back across the counter. A bag of apples, a carton of eggs. The cereal stayed in her boy's hands, but his shoulders slumped. From the dairy aisle, Elvis slowed. His hand tightened around the cart's handle. He wasn't looking at the bread or the prices on the shelf anymore. His eyes were locked on that checkout lane. A store clerk in a red apron pushed past him with a box of canned goods. The motion broke Elvis's focus for just a second. He took a step toward the registers, the soft scuff of his boots barely audible over the hum of the freezers. Then he stopped. Something about the scene made him hesitate, not out of doubt, but as if he was weighing the moment, letting it settle before acting. Witnesses say his gaze flicked to the boy, then to the mother's hands as she counted coins on the counter. The world in that little store felt quieter. The candy rack, the gum, the rows of tabloids, all seemed to fade. It was just him, the mother, the boy, and the choice hanging in the air, and Elvis Presley, the man who could command an arena with a single note, stayed still just for a heartbeat longer, as if knowing this next move would mean something. He reached for the cart handle again, but instead of heading straight toward them, he turned down the next aisle. The boy's voice carried, soft, but enough for Elvis to hear. "Can we still get the cereal, Mum?" The mother smiled faintly, though her eyes betrayed her. "We'll get it next time, honey." She handed the cashier the smaller pile of groceries she could afford. From the other lane, Elvis leaned against his cart, pretending to study the gum rack. The glossy wrappers caught the light. His head was tilted just enough to see her without being obvious. A store clerk in a red apron glanced over, noticed him, and froze for a split second. He turned to another employee, murmuring something that made her look up sharply, but neither approached. They knew the rules in Memphis. You didn't crowd him when he was off stage. Elvis shifted forward in his lane, tossing a pack of spearmint gum onto the counter. His cashier was a middle-aged man, broad-shouldered, hair slicked back. According to witnesses, his name was Carl. The kind who remembered your regular order and asked about your kids. Carl rang up the gum without comment, eyes flicking to the other lane where the mother now fumbled with her change. Elvis's voice was quiet, meant only for Carl. Mind adding her groceries to mine? Carl stopped mid-motion, looking up. One eyebrow lifted. There was no grin, no fanfare, just a embarrassed nod. Sure thing. Without another word, he stepped over to the other register, murmured something to the older woman ringing the mother up. The groceries slid back across the belt toward him. Elvis reached for his wallet, the leather worn soft from years in his jacket pocket. That's when it happened. The mother, confused by the sudden shift, turned. Her eyes met his. At first, nothing, just recognition of another customer. Then her gaze narrowed, and the pieces clicked. The cap, the jawline, the voice she'd heard on every radio in the city. Her breath caught. Her hands went slack, and the coins she'd been holding spilled across the counter, clinking against the metal change tray. Elvis gave a small nod, almost an apology for being recognized. But before he could slide the bills to Carl, the cashier leaned in, lowering his voice so only Elvis could hear. "Sir, you sure about this?" His tone wasn't skeptical. It was something else, something heavier. Elvis stilled, one hand on the counter, the other holding his wallet half open. "Why?" he asked. Carl glanced over at the boy who was now hugging the cereal box tighter than ever. Then he looked back at Elvis, the corners of his mouth set in a firm line. And in that moment, he said something that stopped the king of rock and roll in his tracks. Elvis's fingers tightened around the bills, but he didn't move. Not yet. Carl didn't lower his gaze. His words came slow, deliberate. "Sir, she's been coming here 3 nights a week, buying little by little, her husband's overseas." The store noise seemed to dim. The conveyor belts hummed. A cart rattled over a tile seam, but Elvis's focus narrowed to the woman at the next register. She was shifting her weight, clearly wanting to leave before attention grew. Overseas. That one word sat heavy. Elvis thought of the boy's cereal, of the small pile of groceries she'd tried to keep. He glanced down at the bills in his hand. More than enough for everything on her belt, and more besides. Without looking away from her, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick fold of cash. Witnesses recalled his motions as calm, almost methodical. He peeled off enough to cover her full total, plus the items she'd set aside. "Add it all," he said quietly to Carl. Carl nodded once and slipped the bills under the registers. Clip. The older woman at the mother's lane began scanning the remaining groceries, sliding them into paper bags. The mother looked between them, realizing what was happening. Her eyes shone, but she shook her head. "No, Elvis cut her off with a gentle shake of his own. "It's taken care of." His voice carried no boast, no flourish, just finality. The boy looked from Elvis to his mother, then back again, as if trying to make sense of it. Elvis crouched down, boots creaking, until he was at the boy's eye level. He nodded toward the cereal box. "That yours?" The boy gave a small, quick nod. "Good," Elvis said, handing it back to him. "Don't let it out of your sight." The boy grinned, shy but real, and hugged it close. Behind them, the rest of the store had gone unusually quiet. Not silent, but subdued, as if everyone knew they were witnessing something not meant to be turned into a spectacle. Carl finished bagging the groceries, sliding them toward the mother. She hesitated, then took them, her fingers trembling just slightly against the paper handles. "Thank you," she managed. But Elvis was already straightening up. He turned back to Carl, slipping his wallet into his jacket. "Make sure she's taken care of next time, too." Carl gave a small, knowing nod. No one asked for a name. No one asked for a picture. Elvis angled toward the automatic doors, the bags crinkling faintly in the mother's hands behind him. He'd nearly made it when Carl's voice carried across the short stretch of floor. "Why you?" Elvis stopped. One boot heel still on the tile, the other already over the threshold into the cooling night air. "Why you?" Carl's tone wasn't sharp. It was curious, almost reverent. Elvis paused just inside the frame of the sliding doors. One side had opened for him, letting in the thick summer air, warm and damp with the smell of rain on asphalt. The other side stayed shut, trapping the cool hum of the store behind him. For a moment, he didn't turn around. The sound of a cartwheel squeaking somewhere in produce filled the silence. Then, slowly, he looked back. "Why do this for strangers?" Carl asked again. Elvis's face softened just slightly. "Because someone once did it for me." No smile, no wink. Just that one line, and then he turned back toward the parking lot. The night was heavy with the smell of wet concrete. A few cars sat under the street lamps, their hoods reflecting halos of light. Elvis's boots scuffed lightly as he crossed. The short stretch to his car, a dark Cadillac parked nose out toward the road. He didn't rush, didn't look back. The store doors hissed shut behind him, and with that, it seemed like the moment was over. But a WASN, single quotes, according to a store employee, about a week later, an envelope arrived. It was plain, sealed in a way that felt deliberate. No return address. No markings but the name Carl written in steady handwriting across the front. Carl found it during the morning shift, tucked between the register and the stack of brown paper bags. He turned it over once, then slid a finger under the flap. Inside was a thick bundle of cash, enough, he realized after a quick count, to cover groceries for the young mother and her boy for months. Beneath the bills, a single folded note. He opened it. 3 words, written in the same steady hand. "Take care of them," no signature. Just the letter E at the bottom. Carl sat there for a moment. The sounds of the store carrying on round him, beeping scanners, the thud of cans on belts, the rustle of bags, all suddenly distant. He slipped the envelope back together, ready to return it to the drawer. But as he did, his fingertips brushed something else inside. It wasn't paper, and it wasn't money. He reached in and pulled it free. Laying it in his palm, it was small, light, wrapped in a thin layer of tissue paper, folded over twice. Carl looked up, scanning the store, as if half expecting to see Elvis watching from a corner, but the aisles were just aisles again. He peeled back the tissue. Inside was something no one expected, something far more personal than cash. The tissue paper crinkled softly as Carl unfolded it. Inside was a small metal keychain, a miniature guitar, no longer than his thumb. The silver had a faint patina, the kind that comes from years of being handled. Etched into one side were 4 words, "Always play your song." Carl turned it over in his hand, the tiny frets catching the light. He felt the weight of it, not in ounces, but in meaning. This wasn't some trinket bought on a whim. This had history. That afternoon, he walked a short distance from the store to the small rental house where the young mother lived. Her front steps creaked as he climbed them. The summer air thick with the smell of cut grass and distant barbecue smoke. When she opened the door, Her son peeked out from behind her leg, cereal bowl in hand. Carl held out the envelope first. "This is for you," he said. She frowned, cautious, but took it. The bills inside made her eyes widen. "There's more," Carl added, and opened his palm to reveal the keychain. The boy stepped forward before she could react, eyes fixed on the miniature guitar. Carl crouched down to his level. "From a friend," he said simply, placing it in the boy's hand. The boy turned it over, tracing the engraving with his thumb. "Is it mine?" "It's yours," Carl said. From that day on, the boy carried it everywhere. According to his mother, he kept it in his pocket at school, in his hand when he watched TV, and on the nightstand beside his bed. She later told a friend, it wasn't about the groceries, it was about someone seeing us. For Carl, the gesture confirmed what he'd felt in that store, that Elvis Presley's kindness wasn't for show. It wasn't calculated. It was quiet, personal. Months later, when the story began to ripple through Memphis in hushed retellings, the details blurred. Some said the keychain had been Elvis's own. Others claimed he had dozens he gave out to people he wanted to encourage. No one knew for certain, but Carl believed one thing without question. It was meant for that boy, in that moment, and no one else. Years later, the boy, now grown, would still have it. The engraving was worn smooth from years of being turned over in his palm, but it was still legible. "Always play your song," Carl, reflecting on that night decades later, told a neighbor, "That was the night our grocery store felt like Graceland," and, for one final time, Elvis's quiet gesture would echo long after he'd left the building. Some acts fade with time. This one didn't. Elvis Presley's public generosity was well documented. Charity concerts, hospital visits, Christmas donations. But moments like that night in 1975 were different. They weren't in the papers. They weren't photographed. They happened in ordinary places, and they stayed in the hearts of the people who saw them. Carl kept the memory close. He didn't frame the note or show off the envelope. The story only surfaced years later, told quietly to a neighbor who had asked about a guitar keychain resting in a drawer. By then, Carl's daughter was grown. She remembered her father telling her this belonged to someone who knew kindness better than fame. He never said Elvis's name outright, but she knew. Everyone in that store had known. The boy who'd clutched the cereal box never let the keychain go far. As he got older, it stayed in his car, then on his desk at work. Whenever he touched it, he'd think about the night. A stranger, a famous stranger had stepped into his life and made him feel important. The mother, too, carried it with her in a different way. That night had been one of many when money ran short and the future felt uncertain. Elvis didn't fix everything, but in that moment, he took the weight off her shoulders long enough for her to breathe. Years later, when she heard Elvis had passed away, she sat at her kitchen table, the keychain in her hand, and whispered a thank you no one else could hear. The truth is, Elvis didn't have to stop. He could have walked past, unnoticed, finished his shopping, and left. But he didn't. He paid attention. He saw the struggle in front of him and chose to step into it. Small acts like that don't need cameras or headlines. They ripple outward. From the mother to the boy, from the boy to the people he'd later help, and from Carl to anyone who ever heard him tell the story. Carl's daughter still keeps the keychain in its drawer. She says it's not a relic of Elvis, the celebrity. It's a reminder that the truest measure of someone's greatness is how they treat people when no one's watching. The lesson is simple, but it sticks. Kindness doesn't need a stage. It only needs a moment. Small kindnesses ripple longest when nobody asks for them. If this moved you, share it with someone who believes kindness can change a day or a lifetime. And tell me in the comments, what's the smallest thing someone's done for you that you've never forgotten?